Welcome to another episode of Hard Lessons. I'm your host, Demel Hannah. Transformation. My transformation started in segregation that second time. A lot of people ask me, like, when did you change? When did you change? When did you start changing? That second time, not after the 30 days, after I went back and I did, I couldn't piss. And I did that because then I had a cellmate. This shit crazy too. Dude had 2 years left at the time. I remember him telling me, this was in 2000. I'm like, Joe, how much time you got left? And he like, 2 years. I'm like, yeah. Yep. So, but he told me, like, motherfuckers had implicated him in a few things back in the days or whatever. And prison is crazy. 2 years later, they indicted him of an old cold case. Extradited him back to the county, found him guilty of the murder, and gave him life. He had 2 years left. I sent him in Menard years later. When I get to Menard, that shit was crazy. That shit was crazy. We was sellers. He had 2 years left. And he was indicted of an old cold case, an old murder. They gave him a life sentence, man. And he went back to the county, fought the case, lost the case, came back to the joint with a fucking life sentence. Shit was way out. But he played a role, a significant role in my transformation. He do. Because he challenged me. He did. Because he would read, look, I had some books. My mother had sent me these 3 books. Because I told you I ain't like shit but mob books. That's all the fuck I read, mob books. That's it. So my mother had sent me some books because I wasn't with all that spiritual shit. I didn't give a fuck about that, man. I'm in prison. This is what the fuck it's gonna be. I'm gonna be a fucking gangster. This what the fuck it's gonna be. So I didn't give a fuck about that spirituality shit. I didn't. So my mother had sent me some books. I never read them. She sent me one book by this guy named Naeem Akbar called Visions for Black Men. She sent me another book by this guy named Ben Ami called God, the Black Man and Truth. And she sent me another book by this female called Criminalizing the Race. I never read them. But when I went to segregation, he asked me, did I have books? And I'm like, yeah, I got a couple books. So I gave him that book, and he like, Joe, I think I gave him the God, the Black Man and Truth book by Ben Ami. Ben Ami is very popular, amongst, like, guys in prison, you know what I'm saying, that's, changing their life and changing their religion and stuff like that. A lot of people, they clean towards like African Hebrew Israelite, they do. So being on me, he's like been very significant in making that real, throughout the world, Hebrew Israelite, you know what I'm saying, and researching the lineage of the original Hebrews and all that. That's what he do. I started learning that out as I read, but I didn't have the brain capacity to fucking ingest that shit. I didn't. You know what I'm saying? So when my cellmate, he would read that shit and like talk about it, and the shit sounded fucking amazing. He'd be fucking regurgitating to me what he read. And I'd be like, damn, that shit sounds awesome. You read that in that book? And he'd be like, yeah. And I'd be like, damn, well, let me try to read it. And I'll read maybe 5 pages. I just didn't have the capacity to understand that shit. I didn't. But this is how I start eventually learning how to read. I knew how to read, but learning how to read certain shit and understand it and decipher and discern. This is how he taught me how to get there. He said, man, let's memorize some words. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean, some words? And he like, let's go in the dictionary and pull out words every day, 5 words, and incorporate them in our everyday conversation. And I'm like, okay, I think I seen Malcolm do that shit on the movie. Like, I remember Malcolm on the movie talking about that. You know, how he used to read and shit, read the dictionary and shit like that. Like, I remember the movie, right? So I'm like, okay, cool. All right, we can do that. So I started, you know, some of my first words that I loved, that I would, I just was attracted to these particular words, like aardvark. You know, I think that's like a African animal, you know, like 40 winks. I used to love saying that. Like, guys would be like, what's up, Wax? What you on? I'd be like, man, you know, I'm finna take me 40 winks, man. You know, and motherfuckers be like, what the fuck is 40 winks, man? And I'd be like, you know, a short nap. You know what I'm saying? I love that, right? And I'd be like, you know, I might be in an argument with somebody. I'd be like, man, that's balderdash. Like, balderdash? What the fuck is that, Wax? I'd be like, it's nonsense, you know? I'd be like, man, you know, you looking real foppish today, man, you know? I used to love being able to learn words and share them with my peers. I did. I loved that shit. I loved it. Like, it was a high. It became my high. That was my high. I didn't have to, you know, smoke weed or drink hooch anymore. Like, that was my high. Learning. That shit was my high for real. Because I loved being able to say certain shit and motherfuckers didn't know what the fuck I was talking about. That's how I started distinguishing myself in a big old motherfucking pond. I said, I ain't gonna get no bigger than this. I ain't gonna grow tall as hell. I'll probably never be a gang chief. But I'm talented and I'm smart. So let me challenge myself to be a little more talented and a little more smart. And the books, I started eating them motherfuckers. You know, literally, I started eating them motherfuckers. So my mother sent me the autobiography of Malcolm X, like around 2000, you know, and man, I read that motherfucker so many times. I took so many, like, I memorized that whole fucking book. You know what I'm saying? Like Malcolm used to say, he used to read in the dark. They would cut the lights off and shit. I done did that. You know what I'm saying? I done did that, man. So I studied. I was my own teacher, own student, own professor, own everything. I studied and studied, but he kicked it off. It was the dictionary. My neighbor, and we didn't even have a dictionary. My neighbor used to let me use his dictionary when I used to write letters. Like, everything changed when I started reading the dictionary. Like, now when I write letters, I write with the dictionary because I don't want to be wrong. You know what I mean? So after so long, my neighbor was like, Wax, you can have that dictionary. And after a few years, I gave that dictionary away. I knew every fucking word in the bitch. I'm not bullshitting you. I knew every word in that particular dictionary. Every word. Because days I would start with A and go through A. And certain words, you know, that stuck out to me that I didn't hear people use frequently, I need those. I write those down. And I memorize until they're a part of me. I'll go to B, I'll go to C, I'll go to D, I'll go to E. Every motherfucking word in that particular dictionary, I knew. I gave the dictionary away. So my transformation started when I went to Segragation that second time for not being able to piss. So when I got out of Segragation in October I got out, I was a little sharper. I was a little sharper. I knew it too. I knew it. I knew I was a little sharper. So when I got out, I'm like, okay, I'm coming back out. See what this do. You know, like, I knew I had grew from being in, I got to Stateville 99 in April. Now it's 2000 in October. I knew I had expanded my thinking. So I was anxious to see how I could utilize what I had learned back there now in general population. I was anxious.